Hello friends, have you ever think about how an agentic application can be created? There are different types of workflow, like different types of controls needed. There may be a sequential workflow, there can be some workflows having a loop, some steps need to run parallel. How will you build this with less code? I think Ingest is one of the platform where you can build these systems, and I'll talk about Ingest in this video, about its architecture, what are possibilities with the help of Ingest. So it's an open source platform which will help you to build complex workflows. When we say complex workflows, we need to understand what are the types of workflows that is um, needed in any agentic application. And I'm talking about ingest in terms of any complex application, also with agent. Agent workflows are also complex, so there are number of branches, a lot more complex graph that will turn. But if you think of any application which is requiring some event-driven mechanism, I think Ingest is a platform which you can use. So let's see, there is some task which requires some sequential flow. But at times there may be some tasks which require some parallel flow so that you can finish faster, right? Maybe then combination of parallel and sequential. At times then you have to merge the results and then this is your final work. It may be further. Or there may be some cycle also. Can go back to let's say this node. Then if there is a cycle and based on some condition it will perform some other tasks. Maybe a combination of sequential, parallel and cycle. So when you have to build such type of system, and each node will have its own logic, and this logic will be triggered with the event. These arrows are nothing, just an event. First an event occur, then this node trigger, let's say, and then it will trigger another event which will basically start this particular node. Later this node, now there is a condition, if one particular event appear, then it will move this path, otherwise it will go back and execute again. And each of these will have, as I said, first event and also the payload. Payload is all about the data which these nodes has to consume. If you see from the data structure perspective, these are just nothing, just a graph. There will be some starting point, and doesn't need to be only single starting point, can be multiple starting points. Based on what event first comes, it will trigger. Now if you have to code this from scratch, then you have to write a lot of code, right? And there is a complexity on top of it. Complexity, like we need to retry if some node fails. Let's say this node failed because of some issue, either compute or because of the network or database responding slow, timeout, n number of reasons can be there. So in such case, this need to be re-triggered automatically, but not the other node which were executed before. So in such case, retry is important. But if you write normally, you will see, okay, this workflow has failed in one of the node. Then in simple code, you will again retry the whole path. but which is time consuming and not even needed, will not suit the use case. So in such case, better would be to use some framework or build on your own such kind of retry mechanism where you can retry only a particular node, not the whole graph. Right? So Inngest provides such kind of retry mechanism. Second is throttling. What is throttling? If let's say a lot of requests are coming and now the system is, let's say downstream system is down, right? So we can reject some of the requests instead of bogging down this downstream service. Let's say this particular node is responding slow. It can take certain requests, but it will reject all other requests. On the same line, there is a third concept of rate limit. This rate limit is applied only to a particular user. So basically, if you start a request and we can take, let's say, 2 requests per minute for a user, then in that case, if a same user make 3 requests in within a 1 minute, then 1 request will be rejected. So this is called rate limit. It is different from throttling. Throttling is about it doesn't see and differentiate between the users. It will say, let's say this system can take 5 requests in a minute. Whether then one person or one user will say send 5 requests, or different users send 1 request, um, different 5 users request sending 1 request within a minute. This is the full capacity of this system. Now, if it's a 6th user or any other old user is sending a new request, that will got rejected. That is called throttling. So these type of systems that you can build with the help of Inngest. So now, let's see and how it works. Because you are writing your own server in, let's say, using some Python framework like Fast API, Django, Flask, or if you are using Node.js, then you might be using Express, Fastify, and in the framework is Next.js. All these 3 frameworks, three basically language and its own framework, are supported by Ingest. So what changes will you have to make if you want to develop such kind of workflow, but you want to code and you have an existing application which is using these frameworks already. So let's go and understand how Ingest works internally. So it depends where you are running. Let's say you are running right now in local. Right? So there is a engine that need to be running locally, and Ingest provide a Docker which you can run locally, or through npx command also you can run. And we call this as an engine. So let's say you have your own server, let's say Fast API server, which is hosting some request, some APIs, and you are a user who calls these APIs in your, let's say, client application. This could be a web app or mobile app, whatever. So right now if you make a call to a request API endpoint, you will get the response. But what if I need to write one another endpoint which is long running, or it's a complex workflow, just we discussed before. And I'm saying complex workflow uh, is because it can be used in whether it's an agentic system using AI, which calls LLMs and process the output, or it could be a simple application but with event driven architecture. So in this case, what will happen? You will wrap, you will write your code within this app, but you need to serve this fast API using a serve function, which is within the SDK of Inngest, and you will serve this app, not the full app actually, endpoint. And what are the different functions? So there is an array which can have multiple functions, and these functions are served now through an ingest. This, what this engine will do, it will have the logic of all the retry or managing the complex workflow, basically orchestrating different paths, right? So we have to write, uh, we have to create a client and wrap the function that we want to write endpoint. So we will not write the endpoint from here, but we will say, okay, there is some endpoint, and these are the functions which can be served through that particular endpoint. Now, your engine will basically you created a client, right? Now you have to connect your client with the engine. So when we run locally, it's a Docker image, it need to provide what is the where your application or the server is hosted, the endpoint of it. And when you write this client end.serve, it will then expose an endpoint called API ingest. Right? So let's say you have the local host and whatever the port, let's say 8000, right? And then your this particular endpoint you need to pass in this engine, because we are running this locally. That's why it's a local host, and this engine is running local using the Docker. So any request now uh, for these logic, right? These different functions which you want to manage will go to this endpoint along with the data and the payload. So basically, whenever any request goes here, it will transfer this request to the engine, and it will transfer what are the events triggered right now, and what is the payload and the state of at any point of time. So basically, this client keeps sending its state to this engine with regular development time. So with this, what happens? This engine knows, okay, at any point of time, where is the uh, execution endpoint from that large graph, and also what is the state. So if something fails, those exception will also be taken care by the engine, and it will retry then those steps. And we can have in the configuration what are the number of retry and different aspects of it. Let me walk you through this through the documentation of Inngest also. So if you see, Ingest is supported by Ingest support these type of platforms. In the next years, we have Express, Fastify, with the Fast API, with Python, they have Fast API, Django. Yeah. And this is the command for running your ingest locally using the npm, npx, or going to use Docker directly. And if you see this -u and this URL, this is the URL where your actual server is hosted, and it has its own SDK for Python, Go, and TypeScript, so you can use those as well. Now let's try to see what are the different types of workflows in the steps. So each node is actually a step, right? It has multi-step functions, basically those different nodes, and this is how we create a function, basically client and the function, and this function will have its own ID and what is the trigger event. it, it can perform some background tasks like sending emails. So let's say if you have a request from the client and you need to return to the client faster and do the background task asynchronous without actually keeping the users waiting. So in such case, you can like such case could be like the sending an email that can be done asynchronous. We have sleep. Let's say we have to wait after some code is executed or the code particular condition doesn't match. So those things can be done. Wait for event. This is again waiting till particular event is not triggered. AI inference. Let's say we have one model which is hosted and now we want to um, use that and for inference purpose. Then there is an agent kit which is a recently released, so this can be explored, and that's why it makes a perfect tool for building your agentic application. Here is what I have already explained, how these functions are executed. So there is an execution, durable execution, which is having a engine, and they in that particular engine, what it do versus the state and fault tolerance. If any wrong, it will retry. Okay? So you can go through this documentation. That will be helpful standing perspective. So let's consider this case. There is an user which interact with the front end. Now the front end will have its own backend which actually do some work. So here we can define some ingest functions. Consider ingest function is a simple logic which will have complex workflow, and you want to keep uh, keep tracking or building some observability on each of these steps. If you build through uh, coding yourself everything, then that will take huge time. But in if you use some framework like Ingest, that will be much faster, right? So, so let's say there is some request, which is actually the sending email and then request approval, and then maybe send a message on Slack. All these things, this is the one workflow. This front end will call the backend ingest function through an event, and there is a client SDK which you can use for sending the request, and it will invoke, let's say, those particular functions, and this is the execution engine that I was talking about. So this is your application like Fast API or Express.js based application. And when you run your Docker image, it will basically provide this engine on your local host, and it doesn't need to be on the it doesn't sorry it doesn't need to be uh, on the local host. It can exist on the cloud. Ingest has its own cloud, but we can deploy Ingest also on our cloud. So I hope this will give you a good sense how Ingest works internally, and what are the use cases. And if you are thinking of building any agentic application and tinkering around what could be the best framework, I think this is one of the good solutions that you can go for. Even if you're building some application which is having event driven architecture, and which is one of the most scalable architecture, so for that also you can ingest. Let me know what you are building. If you have any questions about ingest, please feel free to ask in the comment section. I'll be happy more to answer those and help you in fixing your bugs or your queries, and adopt the best practices whenever you are building some system that will be helpful for you in future, because the best practices will help you keeping some guardrails, which if you do it without any proper patterns, then the chances are you will get more time to fix everything. And there is a good community behind these frameworks, so there is a lot of support which comes. Okay, I'll take a leave now. Thanks. Speaking from Manika, signing off.